Look at a map of Africa. Not the coastlines, not the rivers. Look at the borders. Algeria and Mali, Libya and Chad, Egypt and Sudan, Namibia and Botswana. Lines so straight they look less like geography, and more like someone got bored and reached for a ruler. No mountain range, no river, no ancient wall, just geometry. Now imagine living on one of those lines. Your family's grazing route is suddenly international. Your market is on one side. Your relatives are on the other. A border that began as pencil on paper becomes passports, checkpoints, taxes, armies, and sometimes war. And here's the uncomfortable part. Many of these lines were not drawn by the people who lived there. They were negotiated by outsiders, in offices and conference rooms, using maps that were often incomplete, outdated, or just confidently wrong. So why are so many borders straight? Who drew them? And what happens when a line on a map runs into real human lives? In November 1884, representatives of European powers gathered in Berlin. The goal was not to ask Africans how their continent should be governed. The goal was much more European than that: to prevent Europeans from fighting each other while they took it. It became known as the Berlin Conference, and it lasted until February 1885. 14 powers were represented: Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, Portugal, Italy, Spain, and others sat around maps of Africa and negotiated rules for colonial expansion. No African king, queen, chief, scholar, trader, or community leader had a real seat at that table. Not one. Berlin did not personally draw every modern border in Africa. That would be too simple, and history is rarely kind enough to be simple. But Berlin helped create the rules of the game. After that, European empires carved up the continent through treaties, surveys, military pressure, and negotiations that mostly happened far away from the people whose lives were being rearranged. And when they did not know the land well, one tool was extremely convenient: a ruler. A straight line is easy to write into a treaty. It is easy to describe. It looks clean on a map. It avoids arguments between diplomats, at least between European diplomats. For everyone else, it could be a disaster with good handwriting. Across Africa, borders cut through older kingdoms, trade routes, grazing lands, languages, and ethnic communities. The Somali people were divided across what became Somalia, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Djibouti. The Maasai found themselves split between Kenya and Tanzania. Communities that had moved, traded, married, and migrated across landscapes for centuries were suddenly told that invisible lines now had legal force. And the strangest part is how artificial some of those lines look. In the Sahara, huge stretches of border run through desert, as if the mapmaker simply decided, "There is nothing here," which is a very colonial way of saying, "There is nothing here that matters to me." But there were people there: nomads, traders, clans, caravan routes, wells, grazing paths, memory. The line looked empty only from far away. That is the first secret of straight borders. They are not usually straight because the land is simple. They are straight because the people drawing them treated the land as simple. On paper, a straight border is elegant. On the ground, it can be absurd. A line that looks harmless in an atlas can slice through fields, roads, markets, and family networks. Along many colonial borders, people did not suddenly stop moving just because a distant government said the map had changed. A mother might live on one side of the line. Her daughter might marry into a village on the other. A herder might cross the same seasonal route his grandparents used, Only now that route passes through two countries, three sets of officials, and one very confused customs form. This is what maps often hide. Borders are not just lines. They are instructions. They tell people where they can trade, where they can vote, where they can be arrested, and which passport decides how the world sees them. One of the strangest examples is the border between Egypt and Sudan. In 1899, the British set the political boundary along the 22nd parallel north, a beautifully straight line across the desert. Then, in 1902, they drew a separate administrative boundary that better matched how people actually lived and moved in the region. And that created a mess that still exists. Egypt prefers the straight 1899 line. Sudan has historically pointed to the 1902 administrative boundary. Between those two versions of the border sits Bir Tawil, a patch of desert that neither country actively claims, because claiming it could weaken their argument over something much more valuable. Next to it is the Halaib Triangle, a larger coastal territory that both sides have claimed. So, because two colonial-era lines do not agree with each other, one piece of land is unwanted and another is disputed. That is not geography. That is paperwork having an existential crisis. And then there is the United States and Canada. For more than 2,000 kilometers, the border follows the 49th parallel, one of the most famous straight-line borders in the world. To diplomats, it was a clean compromise. To the indigenous nations already living there, it was something else entirely. The Blackfoot Confederacy, the Assiniboine, the Sioux, and many others had their own territories, alliances, and routes that did not care about a European line of latitude. But once the border hardened, a mathematical line became a political reality. A place that had been a homeland became north and south, same grass, same sky, different state. Some of the straightest borders on Earth run through deserts. Look at North Africa and the Sahara. Algeria's borders with Mali and Niger contain long, straight sections. Libya and Chad, Egypt and Sudan, Mauritania and Western Sahara. From space, the lines look clear. On the ground, many of them are almost invisible. No wall, no fence, no dramatic gate with flags flapping in the wind, just sand, rock, heat, and a legal idea stretching across the horizon. For nomadic peoples, especially groups like the Tuareg, these spaces were never empty. They were connected by trade routes, wells, kinship, seasonal movement, and survival knowledge. The desert was not a blank space, it was a system. But modern states prefer lines. Lines make sovereignty easier to print. The problem is that straight desert borders can be almost impossible to control. If a border runs for hundreds or thousands of kilometers through remote terrain, a government can claim it on a map long before it can actually police it. That gap between paper and reality creates a shadow world, smuggling routes, armed groups, migrant crossings, informal trade. Local communities forced to navigate between state law and the practical reality of survival. The line says, "Stop here." The desert says, "Good luck with that." The Middle East has its own version of this story. After World War I, British and French diplomats drew and negotiated borders across former Ottoman lands. Some followed older administrative zones. Some followed strategic interests. Some looked painfully straight. The border between Syria and Jordan, for example, cuts through desert landscapes tied to Bedouin movement and tribal networks that long predated the modern state system. And in 1922, British official Sir Percy Cox played a major role in defining the borders between Iraq, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. The resulting map left Iraq with a very narrow coastline and helped shape grievances that would echo through the 20th century. No single line caused every later conflict. History is more complicated than that. But borders can trap problems in place. A line drawn quickly can take generations to explain, and sometimes generations to bleed over. So can these borders be fixed? In theory, yes. In practice, changing borders is one of the most dangerous things a state can do. After independence, many African countries chose to keep inherited colonial borders, not because those borders were perfect, but because redrawing them could create even more war. Imagine trying to revise every border according to language, ethnicity, history, trade, religion, and local identity, congregations. You have just invented 1,000 new disputes. So many states made a brutal but practical choice. Keep the bad map and try to build peace inside it. Today, the better solution is often not erasing borders, but softening them. Regional groups such as ECOWAS in West Africa have supported visa-free movement among member states. The East African community has also pushed forms of regional integration, trade, and easier movement. The idea is simple. If the line cannot disappear, maybe it can become less sharp. For border communities, that can matter more than symbolic map changes. Can people trade? Can families visit? Can herders move? Can a student cross without being treated like a threat? But the world is not moving in only one direction. In many places, borders are becoming harder. Walls, fences, surveillance towers, drones, biometric checkpoints. India and Bangladesh built extensive fencing along one of the world's most complicated borders. Parts of the US-Mexico border have been heavily fortified. Around the world, states are turning lines into infrastructure. A pencil line becomes steel. And once a border is built into roads, laws, passports, memories, and national identity, it becomes very hard to undo. That is the strange power of borders. At first, they are imaginary. Then everyone agrees to act like they are real. Then people die, proving they are. A straight-line border is a confession. It says, "We did not know this land well enough to follow its rivers, mountains, languages, or people. So we drew geometry instead. Clean lines. Simple angles. Diplomatic convenience. But the lives underneath were never clean or simple. The straight borders of Africa, the Middle East, and North America are reminders of moments when powerful people looked at maps and mistook empty paper for empty land. A ruler can draw a border in seconds, but the consequences can last for centuries. So, next time you look at a map, find the straight lines. They are not just borders. They are ghosts of empire. They are the places where the map admits the truth. This was never natural. It was drawn. And if you like hidden stories behind maps, borders, and the strange systems that shape our world, subscribe to Global Facts. What is the weirdest border you have ever seen? Tell me in the comments. See you in the next one.